Real stories of werewolves, of dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
But I'd like to start by answering a question someone asked a while back that I lost somewhere in the comments section. They asked how my interest in all this weird stuff started. Had I seen a cryptid myself and all that? Well, no. I've never seen a dogman or a Bigfoot or anything of that nature. My excuse is that I live in New York City, so how could I see one of those things? But I was reminded recently of a story my late father used to tell me about the time when he was convinced he saw a werewolf, and this was in the Bronx. I told this story a long time ago on this show, but I couldn't find my original recording or script, so I'm going to have to retell it from scratch and hope I get it right. This was the mid-1950s. My father was a young guy, maybe 20, and he was new at driving a cab. It was the full moon on a cold night in the Bronx. And when a certain call came in, the dispatcher and his friends started chuckling among themselves. Then they called my dad over, who was a big Irishman, bigger than I ever got to be, and they told him to go pick up someone that they said was a regular customer. This guy would only call for a cab once a month, and he always wanted to be taken to the same place. My dad was warned to treat this guy well, as he was a regular paying customer. Whatever he wanted, just do your best to accommodate. Okay, fine. So my big fearless father drives out to the address he was given. He picks up this scrawny, short, ratty-looking guy. He gets in wearing a scowl, and he sits there wearing a scowl. My father asks him where to, and the guy gives him the address for Woodlawn Cemetery. Now, it was after dark, and my father was pretty sure that Woodlawn Cemetery wasn't going to be open at that hour. He started to say something like that to the little emaciated-looking guy, and that guy shut my father up with a growl about how he should do his job if he wanted to earn his keep. So my father shut up, and he drove as quickly as he legally and safely could toward the requested destination. Meanwhile, the guy in the back seat was getting tenser and tenser, making this sound that wasn't far off from a growl. So finally my father pulled up to the corner of Woodlawn Cemetery in the middle of the night, and the guy jumped out of the back of the cab. He went running to the fence around that graveyard, and somehow this little weak-looking guy climbed and vaulted the fence with very little effort, disappearing somewhere inside. I would always ask, where'd he go next? To which my father told me he didn't care. I asked him, didn't he want his fare? That guy didn't pay his fare. But to my father, that guy was a werewolf. He needed to get to the cemetery at night during the full moon. Therefore, he was a werewolf, and there was no questioning this fact, at least as far as my father was concerned. He didn't care that he didn't get paid. He learned a life lesson, which is, be careful who you let into your cab on the night of the full moon in the Bronx. We got a boatload of weird and wonderful dogman and cryptid tales coming up, so I hope you can stick around. And now, let's begin. My dad saved Dogman's life. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my dad told me a story about the Dogman that blew my mind. He told me it happened to him personally, and he looked me in the eye when he told the tale. According to my father, he once saved the Dogman's life from a bunch of hunters. On the one hand, I wonder, did Dad prevent all of us from having proof that Dogman is real? And on the other hand, I wonder if Dogman is more human than we know, and if the creature should in fact be protected from harm by law. Now, I grew up in Los Angeles, but my father only moved there when I was a baby. In fact, he and I are both Wisconsin natives, even though I don't personally have any memories of the place myself. Dad and Mom met and got married in Wisconsin and then had me. Then a job opportunity brought them out west before I was even 3 years old. But in the days before he met my mom, my father hung out with a bunch of friends who mostly enjoyed going on hunting and camping trips together. I don't know anything about hunting, so I apologize in advance if I don't know enough to give you too many details about what kind of mares they had or what they were intending to be hunting. So the story starts as the group of men wanders through the woods and comes upon the stench. With a little more investigation, they discover a recent being devoured by a very large wolf. The men agree that's the largest and strangest looking wolf they've ever seen, and they prepare to back away slowly, not wanting to give the wolf the impression they intend to steal his dinner from him. Animals get extremely hostile if they think you want their food. That's one of the few things I know about nature. So everybody was in the process of leaving when my dad sees the dog stand up on his hind legs, and he's stunned. The dog walks over to a different area and looks off in the distance as though searching for something. My father stopped the other guys and pointed out the human behavior being exhibited by this canine animal. The men were transfixed as the creature finished looking for whatever it was looking for, then walked like a man back to his meal and went back to eating. "That's no dog," one of the men whispered. "That's the freaking Wisconsin werewolf." The men were in agreement that they were looking at a real, living Wisconsin werewolf. But past that, they agreed about nothing. One guy wanted to bag the dogman, and another wanted to attempt to trap it. Someone else thought they should wait till he finished eating, then track him back to his lair. My father kept his opinions to himself, though. Dad told me that when he looked at this animal, he saw a man. Although the head was canine, with tall dog ears on top, the body was really more human than dog. Dad wondered if the soul were human or canine, just because it's killing and eating with its hands. That didn't make it primitive in Dad's mind. If he were driven to starvation, could he really say he might not do the same thing that beast was doing? He was doing what he needed to do to survive, and it was savage and ugly. But that didn't mean the soul inside the creature had to necessarily be savage as well. My father said that if he had a camera with him, he would have wanted to take a photo, but he didn't want to take anything else from that dogman, and he most certainly did not want to take its life. He knew that making that argument out loud to the others would get a loud negative reaction, and he would lose their trust. So as I mentioned earlier, he kept his opinions to himself. I interrupted Dad at this point, wanting to understand the creature's anatomy a little bit better. Did it have paws? Or did it have hands? Dad responded to this with a sigh and said it was sort of hard to explain, but he'd try. The hind legs of the creature had dog paws, same as any other canine. So did the front legs, which became the arms when it stood bipedally. But the paws in front were so large, and the dew claw more conveniently placed, so the front paws did function more like hands than, say, bear's claws. The dogman's front paws in fact do resemble a bear's, except that, as I mentioned, there is the one claw offset from the others that can be used almost in the same way as a thumb. It can grip things and hold them, and Dad said he saw him using his paws that way while eating. So the men quarreled quietly, not being able to decide what they were going to do about this dogman. It got pretty heated, and the next time the dogman stood up to take a walk, one of the men grew afraid that he was about to run away. Completely losing his cool, the guy stood up, and without the agreement of the others, he took a pot shot at the beast. He missed by a mile, and only succeeded in creating a one-dogman stampede. Bushes and branches were loudly pushed aside as that dogman ran away for his life. Immediately, all the men ran in pursuit. It's a predator's instinct to chase something that's running away, and human beings are a predatory species, whether we like to accept that or not. Dad said that sometimes the dogman ran on his hind legs, Sometimes he ran down on all fours, sometimes he resembled an ape in his gait, and sometimes he leaped onto branches and swung himself like some sort of canine Tarzan or a Spider-Man. It was all the men could do to keep him in their sights, but they managed to track him to a cave, and they saw him run inside. My father knew that cave, but none of the other men did. Again, Dad kept what he knew and what he felt to himself and began to formulate a plan. One of the men suggested creating a fire to smoke the dogman out, but Dad finally decided to speak up. "No, don't start a fire," he insisted. "It'll only drive him out the back exit of this cave, and then we'll lose him for good." Understanding suddenly that my father had a familiarity with this cave that they lacked, the men quieted down and listened to him with complete attention. He gave the others directions to go in so they could cover the back exit of the cave. Then he said he himself would start the fire in the front of the cave and drive the creature back to them. He told them he'd wait for 20 minutes to know the men had reached the other cave entrance, and then he would start the fire. They should remain in that position for at least 40 minutes or an hour to give the smoke time to fill the cave and force the dogman out into their laps. The men all excitedly agreed and trudged off into the woods, following my father's directions. Those directions were detailed, and those directions were accurate, except they led to the entrance of an entirely different cave, which was not connected in any way to this one. With luck, those guys wouldn't figure out the trick for another hour and a half, so that was the time the dogman had to get himself to safety. Hiding in the bushes in a spot that afforded him a clear view of the cave entrance, Dad sat and waited to see if the dogman would emerge and get away. Remaining silent for 15 or 20 minutes, the scene had definitely mellowed out. Eventually, Dad said he saw this yellowy off-white eye shine inside the cave, peeping out. Tentatively and slowly, the dogman approached the entrance and looked out and around. Then he sniffed the air, and suddenly his head turned directly toward my father's hiding spot. The dogman's nostrils flared, and he growled loud enough that Dad could hear him from where he was. So then my father told me he did something that I personally would never have the nerve to do in 1,000,000 years. He stood up, showing the dogman himself and his rifle. Then he dropped the weapon to the forest floor and showed the palms of his hands to demonstrate that he was defenseless. Now to me, that's crazy. If I saw a dogman, I would want him to think I was armed, not unarmed, you know? It's like he was inviting the creature to tear him apart. The very brave gamble paid off, though. The dogman saw his chance and ran off on his hind legs, disappearing into the woods and out of sight completely. Well, Dad lost those friends, but he said it was worth it. The dogman was too much like a man for him to allow the others to gun him down like a criminal. That was the end of Dad's hunting period in his life, and it actually led to him meeting my mom and fathering me, so I guess it's all good, as they say. In fact, you might say I never would have even come into existence if the dogman hadn't come between Dad and his friends. He might still be out there with them to this day, and he might never have met my mom. So for that reason, I'd like to say a little thank you to that dogman in that cave for unintentionally playing matchmaker and giving me a chance to be alive. It's still hard for me to accept that my entire existence only happened because my dad saved Dogman's life.
The stone that wasn't a stone. Dear Scary Stories, have you ever heard a Dogman story that also involved the Men in Black? Well, that's what happened to me, and I'm going to tell you about it. Yes, I saw a Dogman. There's not much more to say about it than that. I was driving to work in the early morning on the highway, and there was a partition between the two sides of opposing traffic. There was this creature there on the grass in the middle of the highway. It had long, tall ears on top like a jackal. I at first thought it was a kangaroo, but it was too dark to be a kangaroo. The sun was already high enough in the sky that I could see with some detail. It was eating something, and it wasn't eating a carrot. It was definitely a carnivorous predator or scavenger. I felt a sense of revulsion and abhorrence that I never felt for any living creature before. It felt noxious and wrong. It felt like it shouldn't be there, and in fact, it shouldn't be anywhere. This was something sickening that shouldn't even exist, and yet there it was. Feasting. After driving past it, I couldn't bear the idea of working that day any longer. I phoned my boss and I told him I had to rush home. I was sick suddenly while driving to work. He was understanding about it, probably because he could hear my voice. He knew I wasn't kidding. I got off the next exit and took a different route home. When I got there, I was surprised to find my wife and daughter had left for school already. They usually were there for another half hour. I kicked off my shoes and headed straight for my bedroom. I had a dogman hangover and sleep seemed to be the only cure. And so, as you might expect, the doorbell rang. When I went to answer it, I was very weirded out to see it was 3 guys in black suits. It was full daylight, but they still seemed intimidating. All 3 of them wore dark, reflecting sunglasses. One of them was larger than the other 2, and he kept looking all around constantly. The other 2 were staring directly at me through the glass. I really didn't want to open the door, but I did. They explained they were from the Air Force and showed me some kind of ID. Might have been from the back of a cereal box for all I know. Idiotically, I let them in. The third one stayed where he was and kept looking left, right, up, down. When the 2 men walked into my house, they stopped in unison and stared at my feet, which I now realized were bare since I had taken my shoes off when I came in. The 2 of them looked at each other and just stood there staring at each other for a while. Then, again, in unison, they both kicked their shoes off and we all walked into my home together barefoot. We sat at my dining room table and they spoke to me in a most reassuring fashion. They told me that they knew what I had seen and they were very sorry for what had happened. They asked me politely if I would choose the patriotic choice and not tell anyone about the encounter. I told them that was fine by me since nobody would believe me anyway. That seemed to foul up their internal computers or something because they both stared at each other again. It was like they were communicating silently. Then at once they both insisted that people would believe me, hence it would be more patriotic for me to never mention the sighting at all. I laughed, and the one of them seemed to get really set off by that. He stood and insisted strongly that none of this was a laughing matter and that I was behaving in a most suspicious and unpatriotic manner. I found myself wanting him to stop being so angry, so I told him most seriously that I would keep the Dogman story secret to myself in the name of patriotism. They looked at me, then at each other for an even longer time than before. Finally, they stood and left my house without saying another word. I followed them out and saw them get into a black limousine and drive away. The limo had no license plate, at least not in the back. I couldn't see the front from my angle. I am 100% certain that whoever those 3 guys were, they were not from the U.S. government, but I don't have a single guess as to where they were from. So you would think that was the end of the story, except this spring I got all ambitious with gardening. I guess I'm getting older. I now find gardening as fascinating as I once found single-shooter video games. So anyway, I decided to cut the hedges away from one of the sides of our house, and I found the strangest thing. It was this rock. Like a stone? Except it's not a stone, it's artificial. I tried to dig it up, but it seems to be attached to a metal pole or cable that goes more than 2 feet deep. I know because that's the deepest I've dug around it so far. Now I'm a little afraid to even go near it. I might electrocute myself or something. It's clearly a device, and the only ones who could have put it there would be those men in black. There are stories of these space aliens or interdimensional people using devices that make humans sick through radiation. Maybe I should get a Geiger counter and check the levels around that thing? I'm thinking that I should call in an expert, but who is an expert on fake rocks permanently attached to the side of your house? The U.S. Intelligence Service doesn't usually make house calls. Well, okay, I guess they do, but not when you want them to. At any rate, I'm looking to sell this place and get out of here. I might move to a more populated location. At least then, I won't be the only one getting spied on. I have to say, the artificial stone freaks me out even more than the initial visit of the three men. And you know what else I don't understand? What the heck any of this has to do with the dog man?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.